California is a land of golden dreams, of red carpets, redwoods, and sun-bleached highways that stretch toward the edge of the world. But for every bright marquee and palm-lined street, there's another California, one most people don't see. The forgotten towns in the Central Valley, the windswept desert where your footprints vanish behind you, the fog that rolls in from the Pacific and never quite leaves. California carries a strange duality. There's sunshine on the surface and something haunted beneath. This state has always drawn wanderers, seekers, people chasing something, maybe it's fame, freedom, or simply escape. But it's also a place where people disappear. They slip through the cracks of cities too loud to notice, or vanish into landscapes too vast to search. People who were here one day and gone the next. Some left only fragments, a dropped phone or a burnt hallway, a disconnected call in the middle of nowhere. Others left nothing at all. This is 12 Unsolved, California. Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha Mae Detective Agency. I'm Agatha Mae, and I'm so glad you're here. In this episode of 12 Unsolved, we're heading into the overlooked corners of the Golden State, from suburbs where nothing bad is supposed to happen, to highways where headlights catch more than just dust. These are 12 cases where the trail runs cold, but the questions never do. We're going to start almost 90 years ago in 1936 San Bernardino County. In the quiet hours before dawn on February 3, 1936, a fire tore through a dormitory near Parker Dam on the Arizona-California border. 7 men died in the blaze that night, and at least 3 more later succumbed to their burns and smoke inhalation. One of those men remains unidentified to this day. The dormitory was owned by Six Companies Incorporated, which was the company that had been contracted to build Parker Dam on the Colorado River. The dormitory was housing for those employed by the company. John Doe had arrived just 2 days earlier, on Saturday, February 1st, traveling by bus from Riverside, California, through the desert town of Blythe. His plan, it seemed, was to catch another bus heading north to Las Vegas, but fate, or something else, kept him grounded. He carried a suitcase filled with odd items: razor blades, bottle openers, a small packet of pills, the kind of things the man on the road might sell from town to town if he was barely scraping by. Maybe a peddler or traveling salesman, or maybe he was a wandering hoarder. He gave his name as W.C. Lots, or maybe A.A. Cedary, depending on which witness you believe. He said he was last living in Denver, Colorado, and claimed he'd once worked as a railroad station agent in Northampton, Massachusetts back in 1929. He said he was a member of the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. He also told people that he wrote about his travels, dispatches that were printed in the Salt Lake Tribune. But when investigators contacted the paper, the city editor denied any knowledge of him. All that remains is the story, a handful of details, a few scraps of paper, and the memory of a man who may have been someone who was running from something, or someone who just enjoyed spinning a tall tale. If you have any information about this John Doe, maybe you've heard family stories about an uncle who was a traveling salesman and went missing in 1936, please contact the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department at 760-956-5001. I am only on my 4th state in this series, and have quickly realized the heartbreaking number of people who are in the cold case, missing, or unidentified databases with little to no information about them. There are localities that are so overwhelmed by the sheer number of cases that they simply don't have the manpower to get more information. Littlerock, California is no longer considered a town, just a census-designated place with only around 1,400 people, tucked into the high desert east of Los Angeles. While you might think that a place that small would be able to provide all the information in the world about any missing person in its boundaries, Little Rock happens to be in the most populous county in the United States, Los Angeles County. Even so, I'm still surprised by how little information there is about this particular John Doe, and that's because of how his remains were found. On September 20th, 1980, in the desert scrub off of Pear Blossom Highway, a dog discovered a leg bone, a human leg bone. That discovery led investigators to a shallow grave there in the sand among the creosote bush and sagebrush. Now, I'm assuming that there must have been a person with the dog because I have a difficult time believing that the dog marched into the sheriff's department demanding answers about the human leg bone it just found. That shallow grave in the sand was covered with twigs and branches and had a large amount of lye poured on it, lye being used because it hastens decomposition of bodies. But here's the part that leads me to think that this case would have received more attention. The skull of the deceased was in a box. This means that previously it was a head in a box. Now, either this is just a made-up bit of the story, or finding heads in boxes is so commonplace in Los Angeles County that it doesn't make them blink twice. Nearby, they found a knife and a shell casing. No official cause of death was listed, but the message left behind was clear. This wasn't random, it was planned. It was determined that John Doe had been dead for 1 to 2 years before being discovered. He was between the ages of 23 and 30, white, and anywhere from 5'9" to 6 feet tall. He had straight brown hair. If you know of anything about this John Doe, please contact the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Cold Case Unit at 323-343-0512, case number 1980 10675 1178010. In the spring of 1980, Pat O'Reilly, city editor of the Santa Ana Register, picked up the phone and heard a voice he would never forget.
Dorothy Jane Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having another man. I killed her.
Dorothy Jane Scott, 32 years old, is a single mother living in Stanton, California, and she vanished one night, almost right in front of her friend's eyes. While at work that night, Dorothy had noticed that one of her coworkers, Conrad, didn't look well and had a red mark on his arm. She and another coworker, Pam, took Conrad to the hospital in Dorothy's car. Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. Once finished with his treatment, Conrad picked up his prescription at the hospital pharmacy around 11 p.m. Dorothy offered to go and get her car and pick him up at the door so he wouldn't have to walk. Pam and Conrad waited on Dorothy at the door and soon saw her 1973 white Toyota station wagon driving towards them at a high speed. But instead of stopping to pick them up, the car took a sharp right turn and sped off into the night. The headlights blinded Pam and Conrad to the point that they couldn't identify if it was Dorothy driving or not. But they thought perhaps there was an emergency involving her son. But after learning that was not the case, Dorothy was reported as missing. At 4:30 that morning, her car was found burning in an alleyway in Santa Ana, nearly 10 miles from the hospital. It was empty, and there was no sign of Dorothy or her possible kidnapper. About a week after Dorothy disappeared, her parents, Jacob and Vera, received a phone call. Vera answered, and an anonymous male asked if she was related to Dorothy. Vera answered yes, and the unknown male simply said, "I've got her," and then hung up. That same unknown man called the Scotts every Wednesday afternoon and would say that he either had Dorothy or that he had killed her. The calls usually happened when Vera was home alone, but once the caller called when Jacob was home and he answered, and the calls stopped after that, at least for a while. It was 4 years before Dorothy's parents learned at least part of what had happened to their daughter. On August 6, 1984, 2 construction workers in Anaheim Hills were clearing ground when they found human remains. There was a single ring on the skeleton, silver with a round turquoise stone worn on the left index finger, the same kind of ring that Dorothy was wearing the night she disappeared. Dental records confirmed what her family already feared. It was Dorothy. After Dorothy's remains were found, that same anonymous caller started harassing Dorothy's parents again. Police installed a voice recorder at the Scotts' home, but were never able to trace the calls because the man never stayed on the line long enough. What no one outside her circle knew was that Dorothy had been receiving anonymous phone calls for months before her disappearance, calls that veered between obsession and threat. The voice claimed to love her, then swore he would cut her into little pieces. He once called and told her he'd left her something on her car. There on the windshield was a single dead rose. 45 years later, the man who made the phone calls, the one who knew where to find Dorothy, the one who called even after her remains were found, has never been identified. If you have any information that might help investigators, please contact the Orange County Sheriff's Department Homicide Task Force at 714-647-7000. Vacaville, California sits on the edge of the Sacramento Valley in Northern California, between San Francisco and Sacramento. While it was beginning to feel the early ripple effects of suburban expansion, in the 1980s it still retained a small-town atmosphere, surrounded by farmland, orchards, and open fields, with a historic downtown that reflected its agricultural roots. On October 1st, 1986, Vacaville resident Mary Darlene Evans, known as Dolly, put on a pink dress, slipped on some heels, and she and her husband Al went to dinner at the home of Gino La Miranda. Gino was a neighbor and also their daughter Lisa's godfather. After dinner, Dolly left to drop off a magazine and a video at a friend's house, but she never made it. The next morning, Dolly had a scheduled appointment at the local nail salon, and when she didn't show up, the manicurist called the optometrist office where Dolly worked and let them know that she hadn't made it to her appointment. Dolly's co-worker, Kathy Carney, became worried, and even more so when Gino called to ask Kathy if Dolly had spent the night with her. Kathy then called Dolly's husband, Al, who told Kathy he also figured that Dolly had spent the night with her. Kathy told Al that he needed to call the police. Let me pause and say that this part of the story is just a little hinky to me. Did Dolly have a habit of randomly spending the night at Kathy's house? And how did Gino know she wasn't around? Had he talked to Al? And why wasn't Al alarmed when his wife didn't make it home that night? It seems as though there's a chunk of the story missing. A week after Dolly disappeared, her car was discovered, parked on Greenfield Avenue in Vallejo, about 25 minutes from where Dolly lived. There was no sign of a struggle, no DNA, and no fingerprints. The magazine and the video were in the car, but Dolly and her purse were not. Sadly, Gino and Al both died in 2020 and took with them any additional information they might have had about that fateful night. Dolly's daughter Lisa still continues to hold out hope that someone will come forward with information about her mother's disappearance. If you know anything about Dolly's disappearance, or can shed light on what might have happened the night of October 1st, 1986, please contact the Solano County Sheriff's Department at 707-784-7000. On the afternoon of December 27, 1991, just 2 days after Christmas, 4-year-old Amanda Nicole Campbell, Nikki, and her older brother rode their bikes to a friend's house just 8 doors down from their own house in Fairfield, California. Nikki decided that she wanted to visit a different friend that was just around the corner, but she never made it there. Later that evening, her bicycle was found in front of an empty lot close to her house, but authorities later believed that Nikki's brother had found it elsewhere and moved it. Scent tracking dogs were brought in and were able to track Nikki's scent for about a mile, but then lost it. It is believed that Nikki was pulled into a car at Larchmont Drive and Salisbury Drive. Nikki's family distributed flyers about her disappearance, hoping someone would come forward with information. Sadly, no one did, but the police still had a suspect. That suspect was Timothy Binder, and although he was also a suspect in other disappearances of young girls in the area, he was eventually found to be innocent in those cases. 83-year-old former pastor David Zonstra was also a suspect after he confessed to the 1975 murder of an 8-year-old girl in Philadelphia, and he lived just a few minutes from Nikki's house at the time that she disappeared. However, he was later cleared of any involvement in Nikki's case. No other suspects have been named, and Nikki is still missing. If you have any information about the disappearance of Amanda Nicole Campbell, please call the Fairfield Police Department at 707-428-7300. For our next case, we return to Vacaville. Although more populous than when Dolly Evans disappeared, it still held the bones of a small town, with quiet streets and familiar faces. 48-year-old Willie Hamilton Jr. was one of those familiar faces. He sold incense and framed pictures on street corners in his neighborhood, the scent of sandalwood trailing behind him, with kind eyes and a small smile under his cap. Every cold case file I've read about Willie mentions that he battled mental illness but was well liked by his neighbors. I don't well like that depiction. Mentioning that he battled mental illness when it doesn't seem to have anything to do with his death is unnecessary, especially juxtaposed against him being friendly and well-liked, as though that were an anomaly in anyone with mental illness. So I would graciously request that if anyone who has cold case information on their website about Willie, please take out the part about his mental health. On December 5th of 2000, Willie was attacked, knocked to the ground by 2 men, then beaten and kicked as he lay there. He suffered a devastating head injury and was likely struck with a blunt object. He fought for nearly 4 months, and then on April 1st, 2001, he died from the wounds those men left him with. It was a brutal, senseless act in a place that he should have felt safe. More than 2 decades later, no one has been held accountable. There have been no arrests and no suspects named. If you know anything about the murder of Willie Hamilton, please contact the Vacaville Police Department at 707-449-5200. It was just after 3 a.m. on February 1st, 2004, when 39-year-old Maria Hernandez and her 19-year-old daughter Carmen stepped out into the chilly night air. They lived in Newark, California, a quiet working-class community in the East Bay. Maria had to work that night and usually got a ride from her boyfriend, but that night he couldn't take her. So she decided to walk to her job at a Fremont nursing care center. Her teenage daughter Carmen didn't want her mother walking alone, so she decided to accompany her on the 4-mile walk. About halfway into their walk, Carmen decided to call one of her cousins to give them a ride. The cousin agreed, and as she was on her way, she called Carmen, but instead of hearing Carmen's normal hello, she heard screams. As Maria and Carmen had made their way along Thornton Avenue, through the darkened residential streets, they noticed a man behind them, walking at first, then gaining speed, then chasing. By the time they reached the intersection of Alameda Drive and Contra Costa Avenue, it was too late. The man caught up to them. A resident in the neighborhood heard those screams and went outside to see what was happening, and what he saw horrified him. A man was holding a large object and was hitting the 2 women in the head with it. The neighbor yelled at the man and began throwing rocks at him to get the attacker to stop. The attacker threw down what turned out to be a branch and fled, but it was too late. Maria and Carmen were both dead. Later, a composite sketch was made of the suspect by witnesses in the neighborhood. He was described as a white or Hispanic male in his mid-20s, about 6 feet tall with a medium to heavy build. He had medium-length brown hair and was last seen wearing a blue denim jacket with light-colored or cream sleeves, stonewashed gray or black jeans, and white sneakers. Maria had moved from a small farming town in central Mexico and believed that Alameda County would be a safe place to raise her family. Carmen had only been in the country for 8 months before her death. Police have had multiple leads, but none of them have led to any arrest. If you have any information about this case, please contact the Fremont Police Department Cold Case Homicide Unit at 510-790-6900. On March 9, 2008, a call came in just after 9 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning to the Sacramento Metro Fire Department about a house on fire. When firefighters arrived, flames were pouring from a single-story home on the 7900 block of Archer Avenue in Fair Oaks, a sleepy suburb just outside Sacramento. Firefighters were expecting it to be just a routine house fire, but what they found was anything but routine. 77-year-old Paul Nicholls stood outside his burning home, visibly shaken. He told firefighters he had just returned home from work and found his house engulfed in flames. Inside, he feared, was his wife. He had tried to reach her, but the smoke had overwhelmed him. Firefighters breached the smoke-filled structure and pushed their way through the house. Near the hallway, they found 73-year-old Eleanor Nicholls lifeless on the floor. At first glance, it might have seemed like a tragic accident, but when the arson investigators arrived, they discovered that the fire had several points of origin and determined it was deliberately set. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Homicide Team was then called in to investigate. An autopsy was performed on Eleanor, and it was discovered that she hadn't died in the fire. She had been shot. The fire, it seemed, was set to cover up something much darker. Detectives developed a grim theory. Someone had been watching the house, waiting for her husband to leave. They broke in, hoping to steal whatever they could, but they hadn't counted on Eleanor still being home. Maybe she surprised them or confronted them. Whatever happened next ended in a gunshot, and then the house was set ablaze, an effort to erase the evidence and the life they had taken. Much of the forensic evidence burned with the home, and to this day, the fire on Archer Avenue and Eleanor's murder remains unsolved. If you have any information about Eleanor's murder, please contact the Sacramento Sheriff's Homicide Bureau at 916-874-5057. It took a decade before authorities even knew that Kaya Marie Centeno was missing. She and her siblings had been enrolled at John Reed Elementary School in Rohnert Park, California. In 2010, their adoptive parents removed the children from the school and said it was because they were going to start homeschooling them. Then the children seemingly vanished into the silence of a home that, from the outside, looked like any other in the neighborhood. Behind closed doors, though, that home concealed horrors no child should endure. The children were still there, locked and chained in an upstairs bedroom. In 2012, Kaya lost consciousness, and the adoptive parents told her siblings that she'd been sent away. Sometime between the end of 2018 and 2019, the two remaining children were sent to live with the father's family in Mexico. That's when they began to tell their stories of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse at the hands of their adoptive parents, Gina and Jose Centeno. Mexico Child Protective Services became involved in the case and contacted the Sonoma County CPS in California. Police were called to investigate those allegations of abuse involving Kaya's younger siblings, as well as the disappearance of Kaya. When confronted, Gina and Jose were arrested, not for murder, but for aggravated kidnapping in connection with Kaya, along with a list of sex crimes related to the children still in their home. Gina Centeno died of leukemia on January 7, 2024, while awaiting trial. Jose was found guilty by a jury trial, and in August of 2024 was sentenced to 6 consecutive sentences of life without the possibility of parole, 3 life sentences, and an additional 39 years. To this day, no one knows if Kaya is alive or dead. What's certain is this: her adoptive parents went to great lengths to erase her. If you have any information on the disappearance of Kaya, please contact the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety at 707-584-2630. It was 3 o'clock on a hot August afternoon in Redding, California, August 16th, 2012, when 22-year-old Courtney Nathan Jones Boda, who also went by Court Jones, stepped out of his mother's car, grabbed a black and red Giant brand bicycle frame from the back, and headed into a house on Joaquin Way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Court was planning on moving to Chico, California, and was selling some of his BMX bikes and bike parts to have money for the move. Court was supposed to call his mother for a ride home, but that call never came. So his mother went to the house where she'd left him, but when she arrived, Court was nowhere to be found. Someone inside the house claimed that Court had already left on foot. He didn't take anything with him, no bag, no supplies, no explanation. Court had disappeared before, but had always taken a bag and a cell phone charger. Court's mother reported him missing, but wasn't happy with how the police were handling his case. They were viewing it as just another one of his vanishing acts, but his mother knew this time was different. Not only had Court not taken his belongings, his credit card hadn't been used since his disappearance. So she decided to perform her own searches of the area where he was last seen and found one of the bikes Court was trying to sell in the bushes down the street from where she was supposed to pick him up. A few days later, she had organized a group of friends to search the area, and a syringe was found just a few feet away from where she'd previously found the bike. For over a decade, Court's family tried to find him, handing out flyers, reaching out to the community and to the media. But it wasn't until May 19th, 2023, almost 11 years later, that the remains of Court Jones were discovered along Henderson Road in Redding, California. No cause of death has been made public. If you have any information on the murder of Court Jones, please contact the Redding Police Department at 530-225-4200. Nancy Brummit was 37 years old when she vanished, an age where life is supposed to be more certain and more grounded. She lived with her father, close to her family, surrounded by people who described her as kind, gentle, and deeply loved. On November 12, 2015, Nancy and her boyfriend, Julio Jesus Cruz, left her father's house in Sunrise, Florida, and were headed to Bakersfield, California. Julio was a long-haul truck driver, and Nancy was going along for the trip. But somewhere along that long stretch of desert highway, things took a turn. On November 17, 2015, Nancy called her father and sounded distressed. Her father told Nancy that Julio could take her to the closest airport and he would buy her a plane ticket home. Nancy's father heard her ask Julio what he thought, and then the line went dead. Her father called back and Julio answered, saying that Nancy was asleep. Julio later stated that they had made it to El Centro, a border town at the edge of the California desert, and on the morning of November 20th, around 9:45, he said he dropped Nancy off at a shopping center with $40 in her pocket and left her there. When he returned 2 hours later, she was gone. Nancy hasn't been seen since. She received monthly disability checks, and her bank account hasn't been used since her disappearance. Today, the case sits cold with no new leads, and a family that is nowhere closer to having answers about their daughter and sister. If you have any information on Nancy's disappearance, please contact the El Centro Police Department at 760-352-2111. It was just after 5 a.m. on April 23, 2018, when a 911 call came into dispatch. A semi-truck had struck a pedestrian along the northbound lanes of Highway 101 near the Salmon Creek community in Humboldt County. At first, it sounded like a tragic but straightforward accident, someone wandering too close to the edge of the road in the early morning dark. But when deputies and California Highway Patrol officers arrived on the scene, they found something that didn't sit right. The body lying along the highway was 29-year-old Salvatore Rico Bono IV, originally from Concord, California, but was living in Humboldt County at the time of his death. But this wasn't a simple case of a pedestrian hit by a car. According to the coroner who responded, there were signs that pointed to something more sinister, so he called in the Criminal Investigations Division. When detectives arrived, they confirmed that Salvatore had been shot, at least once, before he was hit by the vehicle. Whether he was still alive when the truck struck him, no one could say. What they could say was that this wasn't just a traffic fatality. This was a homicide. The autopsy later revealed that Salvatore had been shot multiple times. Salvatore's SUV was missing the night he died, but was recovered 4 days later and 1 hour north in Eureka, California. Police did not reveal if the 9mm handgun that Salvatore usually carried was recovered with his vehicle. Then the investigation stalled. Leads dried up, and with no witnesses and little evidence, the mystery of what happened that morning near Salmon Creek remains one of Humboldt County's most puzzling cold cases. Anyone with information regarding this incident is encouraged to call the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office at 707-445-7251. Another 12 stories of 12 lives interrupted or ended. These cases span decades and distances, but they all share one thing in common: silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that hangs heavy in unanswered questions, and family members still waiting for a knock at the door, and investigators that can't quite let go. If you know anything about the cases you've heard today, if something doesn't sit right, or a detail just clicked into place, please don't assume somebody else has already said something. You might be the missing piece. The truth is still out there, waiting for someone to find it. This has been 12 Unsolved, California, from the Agatha Mae Detective Agency. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment as this helps my channel grow. If you would like to help support my work financially, you can become a member through YouTube or through Patreon. The links to both are in the description. Stay tuned for the next edition of 12 Unsolved, where we head to Colorado, where unsolved mysteries lie in dark canyons and hide in the craggy peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.